how do you stay with God when things are so hard? I don't know where else would I go? It's going to be hard regardless. He's the safest, most consistent thing in my life. Like, he never said it would be easy and simple. He said, stay with me. So no matter what happens, like the rain is coming, the winds are coming, I have to stay on the solid foundation. I have to stay with Jesus.
Take that to like the relationship I have with my daughter. I was so harsh to you about your mistakes because I was so harsh to myself.
Right.
Because I had a faulty foundation there,
Right.
that God loved me because of what I did.
Right.
And as that foundation's being repaired in my heart, and I'm starting to respond differently to her.
It's so much about like, are our foundations strong in the Lord?
Yeah.
What does it look like to reinforce them? Like, look at it with the Lord and be like, where did that crack come from? I don't even know how it got there. And to actually practice that level of compassion with our own hearts. I can go back at any point with Jesus and I can repair and restore, or I can build brand new things with God. All right, we are here today to have a very exciting conversation. It's a rare thing that me and you just sit down and like, let's talk, right?
Yes,
It's awesome. We have so many things to talk about. But today we are talking about our new book that's out called Foundations.
Yes.
That we've worked for many years on. And I'm excited.
Yeah.
We're finally here to really talk about what it means to us and what it means to build really strong foundations with Jesus. It's such a passion of mine and yours. So we're going to get into it.
Yeah. How does it feel that this is in the world?
It feels surreal.
Yeah.
I think it's something that I've carried in my heart for a really long time.
Yes.
So I think when you work on something for so many years and you carry the burden of it, when it finally gets out, it's a little just like kind of out of body.
Yes. I've watched you pour your heart and soul into this book.
Yeah.
People just don't understand how much work goes into these
Right.
books and the albums.
Yeah.
And I've watched you pour your heart and soul, specifically in 2024.
Yeah.
The whole team just
Yeah.
poured into this, and
Yeah.
you led them in such a beautiful way. But you've carried the dream of this book in your
Right.
heart for a long
Yeah,
time.
it's true.
I don't remember when you came to me the first time and you just said, I just had this moment with the Lord and an idea for a new book series.
Yeah.
I think it's at least five years ago.
Probably. I think it was 2019.
Yeah. So, but I just want to hear, we have this beautiful book, Foundations, out, but it started in your heart, the original idea. And what was like the original vision for this book that was birthed in your heart?
We were having our normal Tuesday night worship.
Yeah. With our community.
It was in this room, actually. And it was a very just, like we were in the middle of worship. I wasn't even leading. And I don't even remember really if we were praying into anything or anything like that, but it was just a really, really simple moment. I'm pretty sure that Cultivate 6 was on the wall.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
So when you say on the wall, this is our this is like a very multi-purpose space.
Yeah. This is like our creative
record
hub.
albums in here.
Right.
We have the 18-inch journey
Yes.
classes in here.
Yeah.
But when schools aren't happening, this
Right.
is like a very interactive workspace between the video department, the book department,
The design department, the photographers.
So what does it mean, the books on the wall?
The books on the wall, like when we're working on a book, the whole thing gets printed out as we're creating it and designing it, and it's put up on our huge walls in this room so that we are looking at it the whole time and we're interacting with it the whole time. So it's just a way to actually take in the whole book. So it can be up for months, a year on the wall as we're working on it. So I'm pretty sure volume 6 of Cultivate was on the wall because I was very much in a book zone. Like I was thinking about it.
The book zone.
The book zone is a mighty zone, mighty. We were worshiping again. I was just kind of zoning out, and the Lord really just started speaking to me, and it was kind of out of nowhere. And what I heard him say was, Melissa, I trusted the fate of humanity into the womb of a 15-year-old young girl. I want you to teach a generation to rise to the occasion of their life.
Wow.
And I just started crying, and I was like, what is this? What are you talking about, Lord? Like, what does this mean? And the Lord really, like, I felt a burden for Gen Z, if I'm honest, like for teenagers, early 20s, like hit my heart so deeply. And that necessarily wouldn't have been an abnormal thing. Like since before we were married, we've done camps for high school kids. And then the school, the 18-inch journey that we've run for 17 years is for young adults. But it was a different, like, whoa, I feel this crazy burden from the Lord to do something that is really focused. And it just hit me. And I started looking around the room and looking even at some of our staff who were teachers and had spent a lot of time in high schools, public high schools in our region.
Yes.
And I just was like, oh my gosh, we have to write something for this age group. Like we have to write something very specific. So that's initially where it started. The spark of it was just like, how do we help a generation make it with Jesus? And again, that would go back to our early camps of like, how do we help these young kids, these teenagers, not like come to camp, have this crazy encounter with Jesus, go back and have no idea how to actually sustain it in a normal life, like normal school rhythms, normal sports rhythms, whatever it is. And so that was just like the beginning. And so we started working and really just like workshopping for years, content, like how do we want to do this? How do we want it to sound? What kind of tone? Because when you're narrowing the audience, like the tone is really important, right? And you don't want to diminish in any way, but you want to speak clearly. And that took a really long time. I love the part of the creative process that is waste. Like it's pretty much impossible to create anything of value without a lot of waste. Yeah. Like we've written, to the articles that are in here, we've written 5 per one that we just threw away. like that's not what we want to say. Yeah. That doesn't feel helpful. And so the trajectory of it all the way to this past year has been a ride. And every time I'm like, maybe we shouldn't do this book. The encounter I had with the Lord, like just comes right back up in my spirit. And I feel like we have to do this. Yes. And I don't know that I've really ever felt that. Besides like my deepest passion would be our schools and the discipleship we do. But I've never really felt when people talk about like, I had a burden for this, like it's really never left.
Wow.
And as we went deeper into it this year, we were able to like, man, this is really about foundations. Like this is about the beginning. This is about the thing that holds us up. This is maybe like the more we wrote and the more we got into the content, realizing like this is definitely for this age group, but then it's also for a much older age group or really any age group. Yeah. Understanding that we are every age we've ever been. And sometimes we can't even process what happened at 18, 19, 20 until we're 30, 40, 50.
Yes.
And so the deeper we got into it, I mean, because initially we talked about even calling it like teen cultivate or like young adult cultivate or something like so cheesy. Like I don't think we would have ever really landed on that because it's totally ridiculous now that I actually even say it. But as we got into it, we're like, okay, this is the most honest, the most clear, the most vulnerable we've ever written. This probably isn't just for Gen Z. Like this probably isn't just for this age group. But I do think it's important that this age group knows that like they were the beginning spark for us. Like they were the thing at the forefront of our hearts as we were writing and designing, that we really were thinking about this time in our lives, that like 15 to 25, like that time period in our life and how important it actually is. And again, whether you are that age or you are looking back to those times, all of it really matters.
Yeah. Wow. I took this book with me on a trip a couple weeks ago, and we were very close to the canvas of this book all of 2024.
Yeah.
It was on the wall. We were rereading articles,
Right.
rewriting articles, reprinting things, just like we were looking at it every day, multiple times a day for a long time. But I had that gift of having like a few weeks of being away from it.
Yeah.
And I pulled this out on a trip I was just on, and I'm like, this is the most potent thing we've ever written.
Yeah.
I felt like I got to write quite a few articles in it, rereading just your intro. I'm like, we're giving that age group something that we wish someone would have given us when we were that age.
That's right.
Someone who would have taught us some of these ancient paths and taught us how to lay foundations. And as I was reading it, I was so proud of the title, because we did go through a lot of different title ideas. And as I read back through the book, I was like, we chose a really good title. But tell me a little bit about the title of the book.
Yeah.
Like, you mentioned it and you describing the vision of it, but like, just unpack that a little more. Like, why did we call it Foundations, with the heart that you were saying for it?
I think that me and you kind of live in this metaphorical space of like, where, again, like cultivate, it means so much, because the garden of our heart means so much.
True.
And words really matter to us, and they need to carry weight. And when I think about our life in the Lord, I think about my walk with the Lord, and I think about what's taken a lot of time, it would 100% be the foundations of my life.
Yeah.
And again, being willing to, as I get older, reflect back on places where the Lord actually does want to go in and repair and rebuild and restore. I think anyone who's, lived a little bit of life in God, like, you understand that in his kindness and in his wisdom, oftentimes he waits until we're older and in a different space to process things that happened when we were much younger. But we're always like going back to those foundational things. And so I think when we really finally landed, like, this actually is the most accurate thing, whether you're just starting out and you're building these foundations with Jesus that are so important. It is the book that I wish I would have had in my early 20s. So much of what's in the book we're still practicing right now, because we're going back so we can go forward. And that is really important to us. But landing on the title, like, I could think of so many things, even at the farm where we run all of our schools and everything. Like, we have been involved deeply in all of the building projects, all of like the process. When we're talking about our teaching arcs for schools and retreats and everything, it's so much about like, are our foundations strong in the Lord?
Yeah.
What does it look like to reinforce them? What does it look like to have the humility and the grace to go back and like look at it with the Lord and be like, where did that crack come from? I don't even know how it got there. And to actually practice that level of compassion with our own hearts, that it's so helpful to have that permission. I can go back at any point with Jesus, and I can repair and restore, or I can build brand new things with God. And it, like, I never outgrow that beautiful space of like, I'm building something completely new with Jesus. And this is so amazing. Like, this is foundational.
Yes. And
so I think a lot of times when we talk about it in the church specifically, it can be really derogatory. Like, this is foundational. Like, this is the very, very beginning. And we don't feel as much permission to be like, oh yeah, this is foundational. I've been walking with the Lord for 30, 40 years, but this is foundational. And I'm not going to feel shame about that. Like, I need to reinforce this foundational truth in my life. So good. And then we like really got into scripture and landed in Matthew 7. And I just want to read it because I think it like just was the anchor that dropped for us. And it's Matthew 7:24. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came, the streams rose, and the winds blew, and they beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. And I think like when we got into this scripture, we were like, oh my gosh, like the anchor just dropped and we were like, this is everything that we've done for the last 20 years. Like this is if you hear and put it into practice. And when I think about our schools, when I think about Cultivate, when I think about this book, it is giving people permission to practice so that they can feel like their foundations are strong in the Lord. And it does take a lifetime to do that. I think it's really sad when people just feel like I have to hurry this up and there's this imaginary bar I need to reach.
Yeah.
And I just love this scripture because it's talking about practice. Like if you put them into practice, you are a wise man. And practice it's just so liberating, right? Because nobody expects anyone to like pick up a baseball bat and a baseball glove and know how to play the first time they've ever done it. It takes a lifetime to master that. And I love that they're connecting wisdom to practice right here. And then I love that he goes on to say that the rain came and the streams rose and the wind blew. Like it's coming. Storms are coming. Like the rain came. It wasn't like the rain might come and the streams might rise one day and the winds might blow, but they might not if you're really good. Like, you know, it's just not what Jesus is talking about. He's like, this is coming. Like storms are coming. And you, like, if you build your house on the rock, you're going to be okay. But the storms are coming. And so I think when I think about our life with the Lord and how many storms there have been and how much practice it's taken to stay. Like I don't want to give a message to anyone that's like, do it right and you get to skip storms. Like they are coming, like the rain is coming, the wind is coming. And it's really important that you feel strong in the Lord, because that's the thing that actually gets us through it, right? And several years ago, I actually don't remember how long, probably was 4 or 5 years ago, a hurricane blew through in the autumn. I think it was actually maybe the first week of our school or something.
Yeah, it was the beginning of our school.
Yeah. And it blew,
which is when we're laying the foundations.
It was like crazy.
Yeah.
But it blew through fast and strong. And after the next morning, we went out to see like what damage had been done. And do you remember we walked around the side of the house that we don't really go on that side of the house that often. And all the vinyl siding had been ripped off from the wind. And it exposed the like foundational beams from like our main floor to our basement.
Yeah.
And they were rotting.
Yeah.
And we were like, oh God, this is not good. Like we called the guy who built our house, remember?
I texted him pictures and he's like, call me immediately.
Right. Like, and we were like, oh my gosh, this is really bad. Like he came out and he's like, this is not good. Like the way the flashing and the siding was put in was put in incorrectly.
Yeah.
Water was leaking down in.
Yeah. The builder skipped one step on the vinyl installation. There was one extra bend that he didn't do.
Right.
Because that bend wasn't there. Water was coming in and rotting the foundation.
Yeah, and we had been in the house at this time, maybe 15 years. And it felt really profound. I remember standing there with you being like, whoa, okay, this is not good.
Yeah.
But this feels really profound.
Yeah.
If the Lord has a voice in everything, like, God, what are you saying?
What are you saying, Lord?
And I remember feeling that like, man, so I felt so grateful that a storm had blown in and ripped off the facade on our house, like, and exposed what was actually there, because we didn't know. We never would have known it was rotting unless a storm came through and like ripped the siding off our house. We never would have known. And they had to come out and take out all the flashing, all the siding around, check everything, replace boards. And I just was like, man, I can't believe how grateful we are for the storm, because it revealed what was actually there.
Yeah.
And we were able to call a wise builder to come in and fix it. And I think when I'm thinking about this book and I'm thinking about like this scripture, and I'm just like, man, Lord, I want to get to the place where I understand what storms are for. Like, they do expose, they do reveal what's there. And you're such a good builder. Like, we had been in the house for 15 years. I'm so grateful that we didn't feel this crazy toxic shame. Like, what did we do? It's all our fault. We're like, no, that like the guy who put this in skipped a step. And the Lord in his brilliance, like, allowed this storm to blow through so that we could see what was there and fix it.
Yeah.
And I love, again, metaphorically, the things that we circle around when the Lord allows life to line up with what we're like really sitting in. It's such a gift. I mean, that literally was the first week of the school. And I'm like, I remember talking to the students about that, right? Like, I remember talking about like, oh, what if we had a different perspective on when the rains come and the winds blow? Like, the storms are coming, and what is Jesus inviting us into? Yes. So I just love that this book is called Foundations, because it really is about, again, in the beginning stages, we want to build our foundations as strong as possible. And then as we grow in the Lord and we get older, there are so many moments where we're going to have to go back to go forward. Yeah. Where the Lord is inviting us to go back because a storm has blown through our life. That was like in our late 30s, like a storm just blew through, ripped it all off. And we had to stop and just be like, okay, Lord, like, you want to fix this. Yeah. Like, you want to restore this, rebuild this. Yeah. And so I think more than anything, I want people to feel just permission, I think, for whatever season they're in. Yeah. Like, whether they're young and at the beginning stages, and it's like, okay, I want to build my life on the rock. Yeah. Like, I want to build my life so that when the storms come, I'm not completely swept away. Yeah. And then with every season that comes, there's that beautiful compassion that we need to be able to walk with Jesus for the long haul. Yes.
Yeah. It reminds me of our parenting right now, where, we have a 19-year-old daughter and a 22-year-old son. Almost 23. So we're 22-year-old parents. Our friend Jason Upton said that to us a few years ago. And it was so dignifying because he's like, I think his son was like 18 at the time. He said, I'm really just only an 18-year-old dad. Right. Because my son Samuel's 18 years old. I've only been a dad 18 years. And I think one of the things when you're talking about going back and repairing foundations, what it reminds me of in our parenting right now is just these moments that we're having with our son and daughter where we're practicing apologizing a lot for things that we laid early in their life that we've learned a lot in the last 2 decades. And we're like, we actually want to go back and repair that. Like some of the things we taught you guys, like, is like, we want to change that foundation. Like, we want to go back and repair that. I feel like we're practicing apologizing to them more than we ever have. There's actually, there's one of the articles in this book that I have about core beliefs. Yeah. It's about one of the reactions that I would have, especially early in my kid's life, just the pressure I had to be perfect. Right. And there's an article about the way I reacted to Haven one time when she dropped a dish, taking it out of the dishwasher. And I look back at like, oh, that breaks my heart the way I reacted. Yeah. But then I'm also like, the grace that I have right now to go back and relay foundations with Haven. Yes. Like our friendship, me and Haven's friendship is more secure than it's ever been. That's right. She knows I'm a recovering perfectionist, but she's watching me give grace to myself. Yeah. And it's laying grace in the foundations of who she is. Yeah. It's true. Yeah. So just that this book is for someone who's maybe just starting their journey, or someone who's deep into their journey and wants to go back and relay foundations. Right. I just love the imagery of that. Yes. I did construction in Charlotte when we were dating, actually. Yeah. And I remember being crawling under these like 100-year-old houses in Charlotte with this wise builder. And because there were these houses that different parts of the houses had began to literally the floors were starting to sink in because the foundation below was faulty. Wow. And we would go and jack these houses up and then repair the foundations. Wow. And that is the imagery I see that a lot of people are going to do with this book.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to the word you said, practice.
Yeah.
Jesus said, whoever hears these words and puts them into practice. Right. And just for you to talk a little bit about, this book is a very interactive book.
It is.
As I was just looking through it, I'm like, this is not a normal book.
Right.
We say a lot in our school that information is not transformation.
That's right.
And Jesus is saying you have to hear these words and actually put them into practice, do something with them. Mm-hmm. So what is different about Foundations than a lot of books that are on the shelf? And that is an interactive book. Mm-hmm. And it's going to actually challenge you to practice what you're reading, not just read it, but actually do something with what you're reading.
Yeah. I think the practice is it's more, what we're trying to do is, it is provoking.
Yeah.
But not in a negative sense. In a if you don't practice, you won't feel secure. I told actually Cadence last week, we were talking about some stuff, and I told him this because I just learned how to grill. That's right. You heard it here first. I just learned how to grill chicken.
Who taught you how to grill?
You did, in a very amazing way. My house actually burned down when I was a kid from a fire on a grill, from a grill. So I'm facing my fears, and you left for 10 days, and I thought, I'm literally not going to eat meat if I don't learn how to grill this chicken. So, and it was pretty funny. It was the joke of the entire time you were gone was me and Kate, me grilling every single day, which is kind of ridiculous.
And you sending me pictures
of every
look
time.
At this perfectly grilled chicken.
Perfectly grilled chicken.
You're such a good teacher.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. But I was laughing, and I told Cadence, because I think the saying goes, practice makes perfect. But I completely disagree with that. I think practice creates confidence.
Wow.
And
that's so good.
I'm for me, the more I practiced, the more confident I felt in turning the grill on. And when when the oil goes down, like you said, and the fire gets big, confident that everything's going to be fine. I can do this. And I know that's kind of a silly example, but I think that practice actually does create confidence. It shouldn't create perfection. It should create confidence, because I think actually the more you practice, the more humbled you are by everything you do, right? But there's a confidence in the ability. And I think that is something I'm very much seeing lacking in the longevity of so much of our walk with the Lord. It's just the confidence that we're loved by the Lord, that we're in it for the long haul. He's in it for the long haul.
Yes.
We can do this. And I think I love what Jesus is saying. If you hear and put it into practice, you're wise. Because we do spend quite a lot of time just listening to things, messages, podcasts, all the stuff. We listen, oh, that's really great. That's really good information. But we actually don't feel the confidence to put it into practice. So when our books have always carried a very deep element. All of Cultivate carries a deep element of practice. And I would say this one is even more so. Yeah. It is there to write in. It's there we made it smaller and shorter, more travel, that you could throw it in a bag and take it on a trip or that you would actually have it with you. It's not the coffee table book that's going to sit and it's beautiful in that way of Cultivate was just bigger and thicker. And it wasn't something that you would take with you. It's so pretty. You don't want to write in it, right? Even though we encourage people to write in them. This is different. This is beautiful. But the idea is that you would interact with it, that you would actually become wise. Yeah. And Jesus is saying you become wise, and there's a confidence you can have when the storms come, because they're coming. Yeah. That your house is built on a rock if you practice. Yes. And so I think it takes so much practice to feel confident in our relationship with the Lord. It's the practice of doing emotion. It's the practice of reading the word. It's the practice of sitting with the Lord in silence. It's the practice of listening to his voice. It's the practice of prayer. Like all these things require so much practice. And I mean, we both love when we get to sit with people who've walked with the Lord for a really long time.
Yeah.
And we just get to like, you just look at them like there's a confidence, there's a settledness in their life because they've done so much practice. It's just so much time that they've spent in the word, walking with the Lord, praying, like loving people, laying down their life. And that anxiety of like, am I doing it right? Am I making God happy? Is he going to be pleased with me today? Like some of that begins to dissipate because we just know like, oh, the Lord is in it for the long haul. There's time. I don't need to be anxious about my walk with the Lord.
Yes.
He's pleased in me. He sent his son to die for me. He's very clear all through scripture. He's so clear about the practice, like put it into practice. If you do, when you do, like all those beautiful little words that give us directional, like just reality of like, if you follow that, if you walk that way, if you practice this thing, there's a confidence and a settledness that will come.
So good.
And I think that not only a younger generation, but we have a lot of people that are out there and there's such a deficit of confidence.
Yeah.
That their relationship with God is enough. And then it's such a deficit of desire to keep walking with him, keep pressing in. Like it just, I really, really hope that men and women just feel released to do the work.
Yes.
And to not feel like, okay, I've got to do this work for God and with God, like, but I get to practice. I get to walk with the Lord.
Yes.
I'm on this path for the rest of my life.
Yes.
Like I'm not going to give in to the anxiety that this has to happen quickly. I think that's why I love even the metaphor of you under a house, like jacking up a house, like that's so freaky to me. I'm like, I can't even imagine doing that. But
it was crazy to watch an entire house just.
That is
with
so.
Yeah.
I don't think I would have been able to do that. But what I love is that you're doing it to protect the house. Like I think oftentimes it's like, let's rebuild foundations. Let's do the work. Let's practice. It feels like, okay, I'm a failure. I haven't done it right. I've got to start all the way over. And I'm like, you going back in and reinforcing with wise builders. It's like, it's actually to save the house.
Yeah.
It's to save everything that's been built up on top of it.
Yeah. But then take that to like the relationship I have with my daughter, me apologizing for, do you remember the way I responded to you when you made mistakes when you were really little? Like I was so harsh to you about your mistakes because I was so harsh to myself.
Right.
Because I had a faulty foundation there that
Right.
God loved me because
Right.
of what I did.
Right.
Not who I am as a
Right.
son.
Right.
And as that foundation's being repaired in my heart, God loves me for who I am, not what I do.
Right.
Then I'm starting to respond differently to her. And then now I'm going to the bottom of me and Haven's friendship.
That's right.
That's being repaired. So 20 years from now,
Right.
when I'm holding my grandchild or my grandchild's unloading the dishwasher and they make a mistake and I respond in a different way.
Right.
It's like, oh, our foundation has been repaired.
Right.
And me and Haven's friendship can make it for the long haul now.
Right.
But it is doing the work. It's
That's
like
right.
getting under the house and repairing that foundation of our friendship.
Yeah. It's so good.
Yeah. Wow. When one of the things that I've heard you say a lot in this room, when again, so much of this book is like, this is our life message from that very first summer camp that we hosted here 26 years ago.
Yeah.
It was like, we wanted these high school kids to make it for the long haul.
Yeah.
I remember that first camp, we said to them, you're not just here to drink from our well,
Right.
you're here to dig your own well.
Right.
Because if you can dig your own well, you'll be able to drink the rest of your life.
Right.
We just wanted to make it through their junior year or their senior year of school and still be in love with Jesus. But I've seen you in this room talk to 18-inch journey students, to talk to our retreat guests or our high school campers. And you say this phrase so many times, I want you to make it for the long haul.
Yeah.
I want you to make it for the long haul. And we talked about the storms are coming. And if we don't have a foundation, when the storms come, we don't make it for the long haul. No. But just talk a little bit about, like, with this book, like, what is what's the ache in your heart for a generation to make it for a long haul, to make it for their whole life clinging to Jesus?
Right. I think to answer that, I'd probably have to reflect back a little, because we've talked a lot on our podcast about just seasons of my chronic illness, and from such a young age, right? That it's been such a part of my story, our story. And I actually start the book out with telling the story of me getting diagnosed, which is a very, very vulnerable story to tell. I've actually never written it down until now. And
it was vulnerable for me to read it.
I know.
It's just like, wow, I can't believe this part of your story is printed and out there when I just read it 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. It wasn't easy to write, but I think I felt challenged by the Lord to, like, if I could go back and sit with my 17-year-old self, like, what would I tell her? I'm 40, almost 45. Like, what words of wisdom would I have to give her when she was diagnosed in college, and like the whole world started kind of imploding and just kind of folding in, you know? And I think that, again, I really mean this, and I talk about it in this book, that we don't really know what's in us until the storms come, and what foundationally is even in our hearts.
Yeah, and storms reveal.
They do. Yeah. And I often like reflect on the Lord trusting me to walk through a storm like that at such a young age. I was just so young. And I was just faced with so many things, like so many questions and doctors, and you could be paralyzed, and there was just so many things that just I was introduced to at such a young age. And I can look back and be like, man, that reality very much like opened up this question of like, where is the Lord? Like, where is he? And like just looking, like growing up in a Christian home, and really growing up even in a church reality that deeply believed in healing and praying for healing, but feeling really far from the Lord, and just being faced with a lot of that, if that makes sense. When I think about the long haul and why it's so important to me, I have to like go all the way back to when it all became really real for me, my life. Like, at that time, like, will I get married? Will I have children? Will I see my grandchildren? Like all of these things, like when you're faced with really deep suffering and very big questions, that like it ushers in another set of really big questions, and right. And so I know that when I look back to that Melissa, there was like such a fervor to please the Lord, but there was so much confusion. I didn't have any tools. I didn't have any simple practices to stay with the Lord. And I had to kind of find them and create them. Yeah. And then I met you, and then we started camps, and we were like, how do we help a generation like stay with the Lord and make it, and not do this like a wave in the sea, being blown and tossed by the wind. Like it's, God is here 1 second and the Lord has completely abandoned me the next second. Like, how do we formulate like just simple, beautiful practices that keep us on the solid rock? Like, and I can look back and be like, man, I can't, all the discipleship we've done in the last 25 years, for me personally, I would absolutely connect to the fact that I had to walk through this thing. Yeah. And I had to face life and death and suffering at such a young age. And it created a perspective for me that has changed the course of my life completely.
Yes.
And being able to be forced to like either cling to Jesus or curse Jesus, like curse God or cling to God, like being faced with that at such a young age. And then having to walk that out for the last 25 years.
Yes.
Like when things are crashing down and things are imploding and my body is falling apart, like I've never once thought I'm going to leave God ever. Like that is the last thing I want to do. Like, but that is really because at such a young age, I was faced with like, he is the God that stays with me. So no matter what happens, like the rain is coming, the winds are coming, but I have to stay on this, like a solid foundation. I have to stay with Jesus. This is the most consistent, safe place I could possibly be.
Yes.
Like I don't want to do any of this life without the Lord. So even with students and retreat guests and everything, it's like suffering is coming, like hardship is coming, loss is coming, relational breakdowns are coming. The worst thing we could do is like try to do all of that without the Lord. But to stay with him for the long haul, like to practice daily so that when the storms come, we have an unshakable foundation with the Lord. It is such a deep passion of mine.
Yes.
Because I just think suffering has been such a huge part of our journey. And I could have walked away from the Lord. I've had people ask me for 25 years, how do you stay with God when things are so hard? And I'm like, I don't know where else would I go? Like, it's going to be hard regardless. Like, he's the safest, most consistent thing in my life. Like, he never said it would be easy and simple. He said, stay with me. Like, stay close to me. Depend on me.
Yes.
I am the faithful one. I am the consistent one. I don't grow weary. I don't faint. Like, you're going to get weary and you're going to get tired, but I'm not going to get tired. I'm like, that's the kind of security that I want.
Yeah. Wow. I'm so thankful that we have a king that loves us so much. He's the Alpha and the Omega.
Yeah.
And he is our past and he's our future. And he loves us so much that he prepares us for what's coming. Like he said, in this world, you'll have trouble.
Right.
But don't lose heart.
Right.
Take heart. I've overcome the world. And, just hearing 17-year-old Melissa up to this moment, and what Jesus has done in your heart, what Jesus has done in your life. Like, I know just from reading that first article a couple weeks ago, I forgot that we opened the book with you sharing that.
Right.
And it just like, it got me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, wow, this is such a beautiful gift that we're giving, to help lay the foundations and go back and repair the foundations. Yeah. One of the things that we talked about is just how interactive the book is to practice, to go and practice things. And we've said a lot in our school that discipleship is formed by the questions that are asked. Yeah. And there's a lot of questions in this book. This isn't a book that just gives you answers. No. It's a book. Would you say it's a book that helps you actually ask the right question?
I think it's a book that that gives you the question that will hopefully lead to more questions. Okay. Absolutely. It's going to give you language that hopefully will open up more language. Yeah. Because again, like the last thing we wanted to do, specifically with Gen Z, was give like the young adult generation, that like age group, trite, simple answers. Yeah. Life is not like that. It's not simple. Like that's the last thing we wanted to do. We wanted to give them our most vulnerable process, the stories of our life, the places where we still don't have answers. Yeah. And we're still with Jesus. Like that's the thing that's going to actually change people, is feeling the permission, like I can ask really hard questions. Yes. And hopefully the questions will open up more questions, because the Lord is there. Like he wants to have this kind of dialogue with us. Wow. Yeah. Learning how to ask the right questions. What would you,
I mean, I think this is so much of what this book is, but for that 17-year-old Melissa, if you could go back, like what would you tell her in regards to questions? I mean, I know because me and you ask a lot of questions over these last 25 years. In just a couple weeks, we'll be married. But what would you say to your younger self now with what you know about questions and how the mystery of questions, but then also the wisdom of asking the right might not be the word, but asking the correct questions with the Lord, or even sitting with, I look back at our teenage self and I'm like, we didn't really know how to sit at the table and ask questions to the generation that was ahead of us. That's just been something that we've treasured in these days. It's like when we get to sit with those that have gone ahead of us, like we're ready to ask questions, because those questions will give us keys to be able to rebuild foundations and lay foundations for our future. But what would you say to your young Melissa about questions and about foundations?
I think I would, again, growing up in the church, you don't realize that you do formulate a lot of pretending that you know.
A lot of facades.
A lot of facades. A lot of just
like the vinyl siding on our house.
Yeah, exactly. Like you form like a lot of patterns of pretending.
Do you think there's a pressure to just have the answers?
Absolutely. I absolutely think there's a pressure. And I don't think that ends in our youth. Like I think it just carries on.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, a lot of like our basic interaction, like with church, is you go, you sit, you listen, you go home. You might do a home group.
A lot of information.
It's a lot of listening and someone talking to you. It's like you might do a home group where you might dialogue a little bit. But if like we're not really set up to like sit at the table and ask questions and feel safe there. And I think that growing up in the church, which I'm so grateful for, I'm so thankful for my youth and like just my experience growing up in a Christian home and all of that. And I can look back and be like, wow, I felt a ton of like unspoken, subconscious pressure to have answers. Like I'm a leader in the youth group. I need to know these things, and I need to know how to trust the Lord and have faith in God. And the Lord is so good. Like it's a hard day, but God's going to get me through it. Like it's a lot of pumping up and I'm not against that necessarily, as long as it is balanced with life is very hard, and it's okay for you to look at that. It's okay for you to feel the sadness of life, the hardship of life. It's okay that you feel disappointed right now in the Lord, in life, in decisions, whatever. Let's move through that together, right? And I think I would tell that really young Melissa, it's okay that you're scared. Like I can look back now and just like, oh man, I was so scared. I was just so scared. But I didn't feel permission to just be scared. Like I felt a lot of pressure to just believe in God with my whole heart and have faith. The amount of times people told me, just have faith, God's going to heal you, just have faith. Like that, like, okay, just have faith, like pump myself up. Like it's okay. I can do this. And actually internally I was terrified. I was sad. I was getting like reports back from tests, and I'm like, I'm really scared, but I didn't have any space to talk to the Lord about that fear. Wow. And now I would just be like, okay, these are the questions you're going to ask the Lord. Like, it's okay to sit in this fear. Like the Lord is going to help you, like get to that place of faith. But I can look back and be like, oh, it was a lot of pretending, not intentionally. Yeah. It wasn't intentional. And it was just the only thing I knew to do was to act like I was okay. And in the deepest part of my heart, I really needed someone to just sit and weep with me.
Yeah.
I was 17 years old, like being told that I within a year or two, I might not be able to walk or hold a cup, or like, it was just the progression of what I was walking through was so intense. And so I hope that makes sense. Like I would just give her space to like actually believe that Jesus loved me. Yeah. And he wasn't alarmed that I was scared. Actually, it would be even strange that I wouldn't be scared. That would be more strange than being really scared. And I would tell her to just stay with Jesus, like tell him everything. Like he wants to talk to you about all of this. He wants to give you keys, and he's not going anywhere. Like, cause I felt so much like I just have to prove to the Lord and everyone else that I'm a young woman of faith, and I believe that God heals, and and internally I was actually in a really tough spot. And it was really hard to do that much pretending.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
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 So I think I wish I would have had the confidence to just ask more questions.
Yeah.
I didn't even really feel the confidence to ask people questions, and I think it's so important. I don't think we should be put off by the questions that young men and women, or old men, whatever age you are, ask. I don't think there's right and wrong questions. I think there's more helpful questions. Mm-hmm. I think we can get to a moment where it's like, is this the question that would really help me get, like, not even answers, but like that will bring peace to my soul? Like, maybe that's not the question I need to ask. Yeah. Right? Like, but it being a good question or bad question, I don't know. Like, I think it's more nuanced than that, don't you?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I'm seeing Jonathan and Melissa in their mid-20s. The chronic illnesses come back like a tidal wave. Right. And I'm asking a lot of why questions, like, why God? Like, why are my prayers not being answered? Why, like, why are you not healing Melissa like you said you would? And
that would be the most common question we asked. Why?
But I'm so grateful. We did have a wise builder crawl under our house with us, a dear friend named Graham Cook. And we just said, Graham, like, why? Like, why is God doing this? Why this suffering? I remember we were able to just be really vulnerable and That's just right. Like, what do we do? What do we do, Graham? Mm-hmm. Like, we're so overwhelmed. And he said, in his wonderful British accent, said, a lot of times on this earth, God doesn't answer the why question. He said, but a better question to ask is, God, what do you want to be for me right now that you couldn't be in any other season of my life?
That's right.
And that began to unlock something in our discipleship, in our forming, in our formation with God. Did. That began to actually lay foundations that would take us through the storm. Right. It began to lay the keel. That's the part of the boat that goes underneath the surface of the water. It goes down deep into the water, where there's more below the surface than there is above the surface. That's a wonderfully designed boat. If you want to talk about a foundation, is that when there's more weight below the surface, then the boat can sail through the storms and not flip in the storms. Right. And when Graham gave us that question to ask the Lord,
it's like a more helpful question.
Yeah, and we began to ask that. It was like, no, he's the king that gets down in the mud with me, and he weeps with me, and he catches my tears, what I'm thinking about, Melissa sitting at the piano, playing what became "You Came," the song. I knew that you would come, but just those nights that you would. I feel like those were the nights you started asking God those questions in your early 20s. I remember some nights just because our piano sits between our living room and our bedroom. And I remember some nights sitting in our bedroom and you sitting at the piano playing to the Lord. And it was such a holy, sacred moment. I'm not walking out there, something's happening between Jesus's heart and Melissa's heart. But I feel like those were the nights that you started asking the better questions, if that makes sense. Yeah. And you begin to write some of those songs, Beautiful Jesus and You Came. And they were nights that foundations were being repaired in our hearts.
For sure.
When we really began to ask God, who do you want to be for me right now that you couldn't be in any other season? Just maybe talk about that just a little bit.
Just those nights?
Yeah, those nights, and like what was starting to happen then when you begin to ask God those questions?
Yeah. I think, again, it was just permission.
Yeah.
What Graham gave us in our early 20s was what we actually were longing for.
Yeah.
Somebody give us permission to be in the tension.
Yeah. He didn't just give us an answer, like this watertight answer.
No.
Yeah.
Or like, if you do this, this, and this, then you'll get through it quickly and it'll all wrap up, and then you can shout it from the rooftop that God is good. Like he just didn't do that. He answered our question with a more helpful question. Which I think anyone who knows us would be like, oh, that's where Jonathan and Melissa learned that. Because I think we do that a lot. Like, we get asked questions all the time, and sometimes we answer it with another question. Like, maybe this is a more helpful question. Yeah. And I think that those moments for me, again, in my 20s, like these moments you're talking about, I was really young.
Yeah.
I was 21, 22, 23, 24, like literally the age that we specifically initially wrote this book for, even though it's for any age group. Those are the moments I would have given anything for, like a roadmap, because those are the moments I'm just like, okay, like I can't sleep. I'm in pain. I'm not going to just be mad at God. I'm going to believe that he wants to fellowship with me in this place.
Yes.
And I'm not going to accuse him. I'm going to like sit in this frustration or disappointment, and I'm going to receive the comforter. Mm-hmm. That specifically, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. If you don't mourn, you don't need a comforter. Simple as that. Like, if you don't learn how to actually walk through grief and suffering and hardship, you don't actually need a comforter to come. And so when I think about those moments that you're like reflecting on, I was just learning how to give myself permission to just be sad, but not direct my sadness at blame toward God, but just sit in my sadness with the Lord.
Yes. Like,
this is really hard, Lord. I can barely pick up my daughter. This is really overwhelming. And just let the love of God actually wash over me and bring a deep, like, knowing and love and affection and comfort. Because I just tried to mourn what was actually happening in my life. And the comforter would come over and over and over again. And I can just see, like, it just set us on a trajectory of, it was building trust that we could go through anything and that Jesus would stay with us.
Yes.
Like, I've talked a lot in the last couple of years, like the God who stays would be like an attribute of the Lord that's probably been the most life-changing for me.
Yeah. It was, I think that is him. God, who do you want to be for me? Right now that you couldn't be in any other season. Right. I want to be the God who stays.
Right.
That's the kill that's like dropped deep into the...
Right. And I love that when I think about dealing with a chronic illness, which is every single day, right? It's like every day you're in pain, every day you're walking through it. And there's flare-ups and it gets better and worse, but it's actually such a consistent thing that I experienced in my 20s and 30s. The God who stays was like my foundation. Like, that is what I built the last 20 years on. Like, that entered into my story in my 20s. And because we asked a different question and he came in a different way. And I was able to sit in that tension. And that is a lot of why we reflect on these moments, because I don't want to give people like happy, it's going to be fine, you can do it, when life is really hard. Actually, like, the walk the narrow path, it's like, okay, what does that mean? That's actually really difficult. It's wonderful because Jesus is wonderful, but the actual walking out the narrow way is very hard to do.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of practice.
Yes.
And it takes a lot of questions, and it takes a lot of humility to do that and not lose heart. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really what we wanted to dignify, which is something we're always talking about. I just want to dignify the process. Like the Lord in my 20s was wholeheartedly dignifying my process.
So good.
Because I didn't have answers. Like I was so young, and I was trying my hardest to believe and have faith. But what Jesus was doing was just dignifying my process. Like, we're not in a hurry, Melissa. I'm the God that stays. Like, we're going to get through this. And he was just so consistent. And I can look back and be like, that actually was more profound in my history with the Lord than if he would have just healed me instantly.
Wow.
Like forming seasons, like him forming in me. Like, I am the God who stays no matter what. Like, it created such a profound foundation. It's been my rock. It is my rock that he's talking about. It's like, man, and more storms have come, and more hardship has come, and more things have happened that have been very troubling and heart-wrenching, and I'm still standing on that beautiful rock that we built together in my 20s of like, I am the God that isn't leaving. Like, it doesn't matter how disappointed you are. I don't grow weary with you. And I think that really is what just, it changed my life for sure.
Yeah.
And has absolutely kept me for the last 20 plus years. Like it's kept me with the Lord.
Yes. So thankful for Foundations.
Me too.
Not this book. Thankful for the book, but for foundations that the wise builder, we've gotten to build with him.
Yeah.
To make it through storms.
Yes.
Without those foundations, we wouldn't have made it through those storms. No. I'm thankful for a spiritual father who came in our life, and we probably really just wanted Graham to give us a formula.
For sure.
But he's like, no, I'm going to give you questions that will lead you to a father.
Yeah.
And if you begin to practice listening and asking,
right,
like foundations will be laid,
right,
that will take you through the storms.
Right.
Anchors and keels will be dropped that can take you through the storms. And
when we see him now, 25 years later, 20 plus years later, like when Graham looks me in the eyes, and he's like, I'm so proud of you. Like, I know that it's like, okay, I stayed with Jesus.
Yeah.
Like, we're still here. Like, through all of life's ups and downs and all the things, like, we haven't like accused the Lord.
Yeah.
And I think I feel very grateful for that. Yeah.
I'm thinking about that moment of discipleship that Jesus had. The boys had been with him for a couple years at this point, and he has that moment where he says, who do the people say I am? And they're like, some say Elijah, some say John, one of the prophets. And he's like, but I want to know, who do you say I am?
Right.
Again, discipleship is formed by the questions that are asked.
Right.
And he's like, I want to know what you really believe about me.
Yeah.
Like, what do you think about me?
Yeah.
And Peter jumps up. He's like, you're the Christ. You're the Son of the living God. And Eugene Peterson takes that and he says, it's kind of like Jesus is like, now that you know who I am, let me introduce you to your true self, Peter.
Yeah, totally.
And he says to Peter, Peter, you're a rock, and on this rock I'll build my church. And again, it's like when Peter answered that question for himself, information wasn't transformation.
Right.
It was like he had to reach down inside. This is what I really believe about God. And he came out with it. Then a rock was like formed inside of Peter.
Right.
So he could make it through the storms. And Jesus is speaking this to the same guy who's going to deny him like a year later.
Right.
3 times.
Right.
Like he doesn't look like a rock 3 years later, but there's a rock being built deep inside of him. And this is a book, like as I was looking through it again, I'm like, I just love, there's pages in here where there's just one question on there to go ask the Lord. This is not a book that's a formula. It's not a 1, 2, 3, 4 step. Do these steps and you'll have a foundation. It's a book to go work out the process with a father, to work out the process with a king who wants to get in the mud and weep with you and then pull you up and say, you can be more than you've ever dreamed you could be.
Yeah. And to dignify the process more than just dignifying the goal or the reward or the ending or the fruit. Like, we love to dignify the very end.
Yeah.
But God is always dignifying the whole entire process.
Yeah.
And that would be those questions are in there to dignify and honor the tension. Yeah. That life is actually full of.
Yeah. And help you lay foundations to make it for the long haul.
Yeah.
This has been beautiful. Anything else you don't want to say about this book? This is just book 1, by the way.
Yeah.
There's more coming. Is that right?
Yeah.
There's more coming. How many do you think?
I don't know. We got a lot to say.
Yeah. And this is what we've really have given 25 years to.
Yeah.
Is like helping young people and older people, every age group, lay foundations and rebuild foundations.
Yeah. I think the only thing else I would say is I'm just really proud of the vulnerability that our community brought to the table.
Yeah.
One of the main things that I really felt the Lord provoking me is like, if you could go back and sit with your younger self, what would you say? And knowing that our staff has the courage to do that work. They've done that work for a very long time, like over a decade, of just having the courage to look back so we can go forward, and that beautiful journey that we have with Jesus. And I'm just not only of our willingness to do that, but everyone who wrote for this, and that volume 2 is pretty much almost done. Like book 2 is almost done. The vulnerability that everyone has brought to the table has been very, very moving. Yeah. And I'm proud of you want the longer you walk with the Lord to, like, the more vulnerable you get. Not the longer you walk with the Lord, the more watertight answers you have. I think life doesn't actually work like that. And the longer you walk with Jesus, the more willing and desperate and like you are for his words and his leadership and his guidance, and the more questions we should be asking. And so I just feel really, I feel stunned actually and overwhelmed with gratitude at the willingness of our team to share their stories. Yeah. Because the testimony of our life is really the gold of it all. Like, it's the thing that we carry into eternity is our willingness to stay with the Lord. Yes. And the stories that come out of those commitments. Yeah. So the vulnerability is stunning. And again, I hope that it inspires people to ask those questions and to be willing to look back so that they can go forward, and to have the courage to, if you're really young, to stop and just build the foundations, practice the work, get your hands in the soil of your life with Jesus and not be afraid. Yeah. And no matter how old you are, there's always... That's right. Always. There's always a door that you can go in called grace, where you can go underneath that house with the wise builder. That's right. I was a 19-year-old kid laying under that house with a builder who'd been doing this like his whole life. Wow. I didn't know. I mean, he was just showing me, and I was just watching him jack these houses back up and then repair foundations. So, yeah. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing so many parts of your heart. And thank you for listening to the Lord in this room and taking these last, 6 years since you had that original spark for this, and now it's in the world. So, thank you guys so much for listening. You can get this book at cagelessbirds.com. Yep. We're so excited to get this book out into the world. That's right. And to help the generations lay foundations.